Hi. Great. All right. So we are going to, someone told me that they wanted me to keep it to the hour. So we are going to keep it within this hour. And I had the overwhelming feeling when we spoke last that the idea of giving the benefit of the doubt was, Stephen, you and I talked about it, such a powerful concept, and it dovetails with the next Mishnah, which is to basically to be careful not to be naive. So I want to go back to the Mishnah that we did not last week because we canceled it because I was on the plane, but the week before, which is the famous, probably one of the famous Mishnahs of Pirkei Avot, where Yehoshua ben Prachia, and of course his pair is the one who's going to speak next. So these two are a pair, and he says the famous words. It's probably one of the famous of all the verses from the Ethics of Our Fathers, which is Aseh l'charav, make for yourself a teacher, v'kaneh l'cha chaver, acquire a friend, v'havei dan et kol ha'adam l'kaf zchut, and give every person the benefit of the doubt. So the first thing that I want to do is we'll just go straight to Julie, go straight to putting the source sheet on, because I included this a bit. We are commanded, first and foremost, last week, I mean, just to be quick, just to go over essential concepts quickly, we talked about the fact that we trick ourselves into believing, we really think we can trust our own judgments. We're sort of built to be tricked by our own sense that we can trust our judgment. But our judgment is always colored by our ego. It's never clear if we're making the best choice for ourselves empirically, or if we have the best perspective on any given thing empirically. And so Nitai of Arbela says, Yehoshua ben Prachia in the Mishnah before, the one that we spoke about 2 weeks ago, says, bring people into your lives who give you a bit of, who give you objectivity, because the way the ego works is it will convince you that your perspective is the right way, and your feelings are right, and your hurt feelings are right, and your judgments are right. So be sure to bring into your world people whom you trust, who will help you remain objective when you're making the largest decisions of your life. So we talked about Aseh l'charav, get yourself a rabbi, a teacher, ukaneh l'cha chaver, acquire for yourself a friend, which is really a reference. Ukaneh l'cha is such a funny word for get yourself a friend. Kaneh l'cha is really a reference to how hard you have to work to have even if there's one friend in your life, a truly meaningful friend with whom you can be honest and who truly wants the best for you and will tell you when you're going astray. And the last piece of advice around not taking your immediate feelings, your immediate judgments, your immediate triggered responses too seriously is the famous command in the Mishnah, V'havei dan et kol ha'adam l'kaf zchut. Judge every person favorably. Or you could read it. This is not listed here. This is the next Mishnah, but you could also read it, V'havei dan et kol ha'adam. When you're rendering judgment, V'havei dan, you're always going to be a dan. You're always going to be a dayan. We're judging all day long. We're judging our surroundings. We're always making judgments. But when you're judging a person, you could read it, V'havei dan et kol ha'adam, judge every person on the side of the favorable side. Or you can read it, V'havei dan et kol ha'adam. If you're rendering a judgment, keep in mind the whole person. The whole person. And the bottom line is you can't know what goes on in the life of a whole person. You yourself know in your own life that you don't always act so great. You don't always speak so well. You can hurt. You can make mistakes, but because you know your whole picture, you'll know why you acted the way you did, why you behaved that way. But when it comes to our relationship with others, we don't have et kol ha'adam. We don't have the full picture of the person. And because we don't, we judge l'kaf zchut, on the side of merit. The side of merit means that judging is inevitable. We are judgers by essence, but we always keep in mind that the word that comes to my mind is the midah of humility. We keep in mind that although the ego is telling us we're right and it's true and the way we see it is right, in fact, our feelings aren't necessarily true. There's a whole person. We don't have the whole picture. And so when it comes to regular people, as in non-evil people, we're commanded to look for favorable judgments. She's probably acting this way because he probably said this because this group probably acts this way because, and we are meant to push ourselves to render a favorable judgment. That's what it means in the book of Leviticus. And I quoted the book of Leviticus to remind us that this is not just in the Mishnah, which is in the Talmud, which is the first part of the Talmud, but it's actually in the book of Leviticus, which is the written Torah given to Moshe from God on Mount Sinai, which is to judge your fellow man justly, which doesn't mean that you are a shmata, that you're a Pollyanna, that you say, no, that you go through some silly mental gymnastics to find favorable judgment. It means you understand that by nature, judgment is colored by ego, and you should always be suspicious of your own feelings. You should be suspicious of your own judgments. They're colored by emotional places that don't lend themselves to empirical perspective. So we are commanded in our Torah, in our written Torah, to go out of our way to look for a favorable judgment. Here in Israel, that I'm telling you, in Jerusalem, just when I go in the morning and I take the bus every morning to go to my Hebrew class, I literally can fulfill this mitzvah all the time. Someone sitting down and there's an older person standing up, or someone pushes you on the bus, or someone, 5 people cut you off. There's continuous, it's not as like a ascetic, it's like a very, like in your face, there's tons of people, not a lot of space. There's constantly opportunity to say, just because this is my triggered judgment doesn't mean it's so. We are literally supposed to go out of our way. The Sefer HaChinuch says, which describes the book that describes all the mitzvot. So as much as we can understand God's infinite perspective on the mitzvot, the Sefer HaChinuch tries to explain an understandable reason for each mitzvah, which is to go out of your way to interpret people's actions for the good. On top of that, we have something that we probably won't think of on a day-to-day level, but if we can just meditate on this and understand that the way that we judge other people is how we are judged. When we cut people slack, when we show people the benefit of the doubt, when we say, I don't have the whole picture, et kol ha'adam b'chaf zchut. If I'm going to render judgment, I need to know the whole person. I don't know the whole person. So you know what? Even though my triggered response is X, Y, or Z, I understand I don't have the full picture. Chances are they're just having a bad day. They're this, that, or this. And I'm going to render like a positive judgment. I don't have the full picture. And that's what King David says when he says, God is your shadow. Just like a shadow mimics your behavior to the T with exactitude, what King David is telling us here in the book of Psalms is God mirrors our behavior to a T. how we relate to other people is how he will in turn relate to us. If we are constantly looking to cut people slack, to understand that people are fallible, just like we are, just like we know that when we were rude or we were moody or we were jealous, we sort of had a backstory and we could contextualize our behavior and understand why we acted the way we did. That's how we need to extend judgment to other people. And God mimics that. When we got that's what it means when King David says, God is your shadow. So King David says, God is your shadow. Just like when I go like this, my shadow goes like this. So too, when we go like this, God mirrors us. The way we judge people is the way God judges us. And then the Baal Shem Tov, the father of the Hasidic movement, hundreds of years ago, says, God is your shadow. God is also your mirror. And what that means is what irks us, what bugs us, what triggers us in other people is really a reflection of something that bothers us within ourselves. So if we find ourselves very judgmental of a given person, it's often a reflection of something that we really need to look at in ourselves. God is your shadow. God is a mirror. The triggered people in your lives are mirrors to you to tell you what you need to work on yourself. And I just had to include this beautiful prayer that is in Kever Rachel, because in Rachel's tomb, because these are the parshas, last week's parsha, and to a certain part of this week's parsha is the burial of our matriarch, Rachel. And if we had more time, we could talk about her life and her burial, which is so powerful, but we don't have time to talk about that. But what's interesting about Rachel, just synopsized, is that she was the beloved wife of Jacob, but Jacob was also married to Leah. Jacob was also married to Bilhah and Zilpah, and they were the matriarchs of the 4 tribes, of the 12 tribes. They were the 4 matriarchs, but Rachel was the beloved one. But through a series of events, she was not buried with Jacob in the grand Ma'arat HaMachpelah, where all the matriarchs and patriarchs are buried in Hebron. She was buried along the road toward Efrat, almost like seemingly as an afterthought. So the story that is in this week's parsha is Joseph's anger toward his father. How could you have buried Rachel in such a, my mother, your wife, your beloved wife, in such a non-honoring way? And so the whole story, which kind of ends in this week's Torah portion, is Yosef coming to basically be Dan Lekaf Schut, to give the benefit of the doubt to his father, that in fact his father knew what he was doing. So that in fact Rachel had to be buried there. Why did Rachel have to be buried along the road, not in a place of tremendous honor? Why was she buried along the road? Well, we learn later on, we learn from the Nachmanides, we learn that in fact, later on, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later, the Jews are going to go to exile, and they're going to leave by way of the road which she's buried on. They're going to be kicked out of Israel, they're going to be kicked out of Jerusalem, and they're going to leave where Rachel is buried, and Rachel is going to cry for them. And in the merit of her tears, the Jewish people will return to their borders. So it's an incredibly interesting story. You should definitely go hear Eve talk about it this week. I'm sure she'll talk about it. But the whole story is, it looks a certain way. It looks like Jacob made an enormous, almost like he was incredibly disrespectful to Rachel. But in fact, she had to be buried there in order to spiritually reign over and cry for the Jewish people as they left Israel and were kicked out of the land. And she would almost be there as like a spiritual matriarch. So when you're at Rachel's tomb, there's an inscription. And I put it there because I think that it's such a beautiful prayer. You might even want to cut it out and put it, if you have a siddur, you might want to put it in your siddur. Or if you have by your bedside, you might want to put it by your bedside. But it's basically a prayer asking God to help you give people the benefit of the doubt, because the nature of the benefit of the doubt is when you're not in the moment, you can understand how powerful it is that we don't have the whole picture, that we often do the very same thing that we attribute, that we fault somebody else for doing, that God is our shadow. Not only is he our shadow and mimics how he treats us the way we treat others, but he's also a mirror, helping us understand that what bothers us is really what we have in ourselves. We can understand all those things, but at the moment that we're in judgment, we forget all of it. And the ego pushes us to render negative judgment in a very, very powerful way. So the idea that you actually have to pray like to God to help you not judge unfavorably is a very powerful idea. That it's not that different from an alcoholic or anyone who struggles with addiction. And the first step of the 12 steps is to recognize I really can't do it on my own. The ego drive is too strong for me to do it on my own. So I literally I have to incorporate a higher power, and I have to beseech a higher power, because I don't really, when I'm outside of it, I think I can handle it on my own. But when I'm in it, it's like I'm not in control of myself. And so a Jew knows that they pray at that moment. And this is the prayer. It's on the walls of the tomb of Rachel. Hashem, God, please help me, guide me, and show me the straight path, so that I avoid stumbling in unworthy pursuits and I refrain from speaking in a way that is not in accordance with your will. May I merit to be good to everyone, and may I not seek out people's failings. Rather, may I always be worthy to do my utmost, using all my capabilities to find zechut. Zechut means merit. So merit and worth in each and every person in Klal Yisrael, in the Jewish people, your holy nation, even the smallest of the small, okay? Even the ones who I think are acting deplorably, and even those who stand up against me, even those who I almost like I have a right to be, to have a case against. Through your mercy, may I always merit to judge others favorably. May you bestow upon me the intelligence to understand how to search for and find redeeming factors. I love that, because in Judaism, you can be incredibly smart, but it doesn't make you a chacham. It doesn't make you truly wise. Hitler was very smart. Stalin was very smart. Smartness doesn't mean a heck of a lot. In fact, people can use smartness for destruction and evil, but chokhmah, or in this, it's being translated as intelligence, it's the ability to discern. It's something deeper. It's got a moral value. Just pure smarts, it doesn't have a moral value to it, but chokhmah is moral. It's the kind of deep wisdom that allows me to know how to search for and find redeeming factors in people, strengths in people, virtues in people, in my fellow man at all times. So my advice to myself, and you can take it or not, is cut this out and put it by your bedside. It's a beautiful prayer. And we really know, even in modern psychology, that the human being, when they want to pivot, when they want to change something that is a strong ego drive, you need to beseech the Almighty. You really can't do it on your own. And even if you're not coming from a religious perspective, that's what we learn in the 12 steps, which is I cannot do this on my own. I need help. Help me use my wisdom to look for the good in other people, knowing that God is my shadow, and the events in my life are a mirror, and the way that I judge others is the way you will judge me, God. So that's the previous Mishnah. And it's very, very powerful. It's an enormous idea in Judaism. It's one of the fundamental, basic values of Judaism, to be dan l'kol ha'adam b'chaf, to judge people favorably. And yet, now we have partner number 2, because these are zugot, these are partners. So now we have Nitai of Arbela, and And he says, true and true and true, and yet. He's now saying, that's good, but yet, Nitai ha'arbeli omer, harchek mishachen ra. Distance, oh, go to the top, Julie. The top. Yeah, distance yourself from a bad neighbor. Ve'al titchaber l'rasha. Don't attach yourself to an evil person. Ve'al tityaesh min hapranios. And don't despair of retribution. So the first thing we have here is to be dan l'kol hadam b'chaf zchut does not mean that you should be naive. It does not mean that you should associate with all sorts of people who are really acting in compromising ways. You have to be constantly trying to give people the benefit of the doubt, but also you have to know when somebody is a bad influence and you need to separate from them. It doesn't mean you have to, it doesn't say you should judge them negatively. What it does say is be careful of yourself, distance yourself from them. Basically, what I think Nitai of Arbela is saying is the human being is a social being and an imitative creature, meaning that by nature, people absorb their environment. They tend more or less to conform to the values and patterns of behavior of the people around them. It's very, again, this is yet another request to not be naive. Don't think that you're not affected by your environment. You have to be unbelievably discerning about who you associate with, who you attach yourself with. So we have harchek mishachen ra, distance yourself from a bad neighbor. Yal titchaber l'rasha. Don't get super close to somebody who's a very bad influence and think that you can be impervious or you can help them see the light and you can attach yourself to them and it won't sink in. And the Torah gives, in the book of Genesis, the Torah gives the example of Lot. Lot was the nephew of Abraham, who when it came time for God to destroy Sodom, to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot, who was himself not very moral, but because he had attached himself to his uncle, Abraham, he was saved because so much of who Abraham was had seeped into Lot. And conversely, we have the story of Korach. Korach was the cousin of Moses who waged a rebellion against Moses, and there were 250 great people who joined Moses's cousin. Moses's cousin was Korach, to wage war to depose Moses. Who were the 250 people who joined with Korach, who joined in this evil association? They were his neighbors. It was Dasan and Aviram. It was the tribe of Reuven. These were the people who were close to Korach, and in the end, they all died because it's not just a cute aphorism. Julie, go down. When the Midrash tells us, go down a bit. It says, "Woe betides the wicked, and woe his neighbor." I was reading a very interesting, one of my favorite journalists is Barry Weiss. I highly suggest her, whether you're liberal or conservative. Barry is just, she was in the New York Times. She left it ultimately, but she's a voice of reason. She's a centrist. She's a moderate person. She's just got seichel. She's not a party hack on either end. She's a voice of reason. But she has a common sense with Barry Weiss. It's a very powerful, I get her email. I subscribe to her and she has different people writing. She had this in the last article that I read today, she had, oh my gosh, what was her name? Who was years ago, she was a 20-year-old student of like an exchange student in Italy, and she was accused of a murder. It was, her last name was Smart. I think was it Elizabeth Smart? Was that right? No, that's not right. What was her name?
Isn't it Amanda Knox?
Elizabeth Smart was kidnapped and found. She was a miracle.
Right. Amanda Knox. So Amanda Knox, she wrote, and I can send it to Julie, and Julie can send it to you. She was ultimately, she was in jail for 4 years, and they found out ultimately she did not commit the crime. But she spoke about it's an incredible article, but she brings up different people who associate with overtly bad people, and then they become bad themselves, and then the bad person, whatever happens to them, and then they're left picking up the pieces. So she brings up the story of Jeffrey Epstein and Giselle Maxlin, or however you pronounce her last name, who he dies, and she also did probably very, very bad things, but she's left with it. So I'm not taking her off the hook. I'm only saying that the idea that woe betides the wicked and woe his neighbor, meaning if a person attaches themselves to a very negative person, then their ultimate downfall will also be tragic and traumatic. And conversely, fortunate are the righteous, and fortunate are those who are attached to them. So, okay, these are very extreme examples. On a biblical level, we have Korach and his associates, and we have Abraham's nephew Lot, who attached himself to the good. But for our own selves, we just have to realize, again, this is really about, what comes to my mind with these Mishnahs is a human being needs to use their intelligence to discern, to be extremely discerning, when to give the benefit of the doubt, when to make sure not to distance themselves, that you can't be totally absorbed in negative environments and not be affected by those environments. You have to be honest with the nature of being human, which is that you're imitative and you're social and you absorb what's around you. And in general, it's easier to go down than to go up. There's the quandary that we're social and we're imitative and we're affected by people. And we tend to absorb generally attitudes that are out there in the world. And we have an ego that doesn't necessarily tell us straight when we're doing good and when we're not doing good, when we're seeing clear and when we're not seeing clear. And so we need to know that in general, it's easier to go down than to go up. And this is kind of illustrated, Julie, if you go to the top of the second page, this is sort of illustrated in this kind of cryptic story in the book of Haggai, which is that Haggai had Navi. This is very hard to understand, but the principle you'll understand. He was ordered to gather the Kohanim, the priests, and ask them. This is in the days of the temple when there was a concept of spiritual purity and spiritual impurity that we don't have today. But in the days of spiritual purity, if there were certain things that were pure and impure. And Haggai, the prophet, asks the Kohanim, if a man carries hallowed meat, holy meat, something holy in a corner of his garment, and with his garment corner, he touches bread or pottage. In other words, he has something inherently holy, inherently pure, and then he touches an object. Does that object become holy itself? Oh, I didn't write this right. And the Kohanim answered, and they said, no. In other words, if something is pure, doesn't necessarily mean good, but for the sake of our Mishnah, if something's inherently good, if it touches something that's maybe neutral, will it, by virtue of being touched, be good? And Haggai said, no. If one who has become ritually unclean by a dead body touches any of these, if one is impure, shall something inherently tumadik, inherently impure that touches something sort of neutral. What does that neutral item become ritually unclean? And the Kohanim answered, yes. So in essence, what that means is it's naive for us to think that when we put ourselves, and everyone's got to figure out for themselves what they're connected with, that may be right, maybe not right, but because it's kind of like the mother's milk, the baby food of our culture, we think it's right, but maybe it's not right. I need to be discerning. Just because I'm osek in it, just because I'm surrounded by it, it doesn't mean that it's right. This is such a Jewish idea. It really is the essence of Judaism. Even the word for Hebrew means ivri. It comes from avar. It means the other side. It means we don't just do things because they are in the avirah, they're in the air. We have to use our intelligence to say, by nature, what I'm exposed to is going to become what I think is normal. And that's why in every generation, no matter how dysfunctional the generation, people think that what they're exposed to and what sort of is the cultural milieu is normal because they are surrounded by it. But this is saying, no, you are as a human being, as an individual, as a neshama, as a soul, as a unique human being created in the image of God, you are obligated to say, just because it surrounds me doesn't make it right. And by nature of being surrounded by it, I'm affected by it. And it's naive for me to say that I'm not. And so I have to use, again, just like in our previous Mishnah, we say a prayer. We actually say to God, help me. Alone with my ego, I'm totally helpless. It's like if you've ever struggled with an addiction, when you don't want to drink, when you don't want the drugs, when you don't want to gamble, when you're just not in the desire, you say, I can control this. And then boom, the desire comes, you lose the control. And that's why the very first step is, I really have no control. And that's really why we beseech Hashem to help us give the benefit of the doubt. Because when they're in the moment of judgment, we don't have that control. So we are told, so the Mishnah tells us, it says, harchek mishachin ra. Harchek means rachok. It means distance yourself. It means be smart where you live, who you're physically surrounded with. And then it says, al titchaber l'rasha. So it's interesting. If you go back to the previous Mishnah, it says, ukane lacha chaver. Acquire for yourself a chaver. In other words, you have to go out of your way to be a friend and merit the friendship of, even if it's one person who loves you and wants the best for you and will tell you straight when you need to look at something in a new way. But here we use the same word, chaver, which means chibur, it means connection. Some people know the word chavura. It means like connection of people. Don't connect to a not good person. It could be that in your work, you have to work with them. It could be that in your family, you have somebody who's problematic. It could be that in your friendship life, you have somebody who is not a good influence. But don't titchaver lahem. Don't connect your kishkas to them. Have a degree of removal from them. It's like I read somewhere a metaphor of like a motor. If you have like a kitchen appliance, it will have a motor, and all the various parts of the appliance are connected to that motor. But the motor itself kind of exists independently from the pieces. But in order for the pieces to work, they're connected to the motor. But the motor doesn't need the pieces to work. And that's the concept of chibur, which is you might have people in your life that are pulling, that aren't simple influences for you, but be very careful that you're not emotionally entrenched in those relationships, that you're not deeply connected. I mean, this sounds sort of aloof and kind of almost cruel, but bear with me with this metaphor. If you go to the dentist wears a mask. If you go to the doctor, even before COVID, if you go to the doctor washes their hands. So what it means is I care about you. I'm in it with you, but for my own safety, I need a degree of protection and removal. And that's really what it's saying here. The Untitled Chapter. The previous mission says, do anything you can to acquire one person that you're mechubar with them, that you're totally connected with them, where they can tell you, they can help you truly, but from a place of love, but not just yes man you, but truly help you. But the next mission says, but don't do that kind of chibur with someone who's going to be a bad example for you. It could be that you need them, they're in your life, whatever. But just like the motor, just like the dentist, when you know that something could potentially affect you adversely, there is a degree of independence from that person. So that's the Untitled Chapter. That we are imitative creatures, we're social creatures, we are affected by other people, and we should not be naive. We need to give people the benefit of the doubt, but we also need to use discernment when something is a bad influence and have a degree of removal from those things. And then the last part of the Mishnah, and then we'll open it up to the group. The last part of the Mishnah is V'al tityaesh mihapranios, which V'al tityaesh is a command. It means don't despair. Min hapranios, from divine retribution, from punishment, or whatever it means. So if we connect that to this Mishnah, what I've learned is that basically what it could mean different things. But one of the things it could mean is, one of the things that makes people connect to other people. Like, I mean, again, this is not about who this Giselle Maxlin, I don't even know how to pronounce her name. It's not about who she was. But if you think about the cleaving to a very bad person. So basically what this is saying is, be careful, give people the benefit of the doubt, look for ways to give them the benefit of the doubt, also be smart, separate yourself, don't live with negative influence, and certainly don't emotionally, psychologically attach yourself to negative influence. The Al Titya Eish Min Hapranios, and don't worry. At the end of the day, good people are rewarded, and bad people will experience their due. What's the word? They'll get what's coming to them in this world or the next. But don't make the mistake of, partying with the cool kids, thinking that they're getting all the great stuff in this world, because we live in two worlds. We live in this world and we live in the next world. And sometimes bad people get their rewards in this finite world, and amazing people, tzaddikim, righteous people, get their suffering in this world in order to have a more pure next world. These are very spiritual ideas, but the point is that we really don't know why bad things happen to good people. But what we do know is that this is not all that there is. So if you see a bad person partying it up and having a great time and having 3 houses and having a yacht and having all the gorgeous ladies and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, don't think that's the whole picture. Don't let your ego push you toward chibur, push you toward cleaving to them. Have the discernment to know that they may be getting reward in this world, so to speak, when in fact, ultimately, God is the true judge, and at the end of the day, this is not who you want to attach yourself with. So you could read it like that. Keep away from a bad person. Don't cleave, don't cleave with a negative person, and don't worry. People get their just rewards. So if somebody behaves badly in this world, ultimately, no deed is unmet in the big picture. But it can also mean something else. It can also mean don't discount the possibility of a bigger picture, of a bigger divine picture. So what does that mean? So a number of commentaries are saying here that we really don't know the whole picture. And so really don't despair that there isn't a bigger picture. And I think there's almost like a Christian term. I really think it's almost Christian. It's called temperance. It's a character trait called temperance. People used to talk about temperance in the 19th century. It was a valuable character trait that is totally lost on this generation. It's called temperance. Temperance is, God, you have the whole picture. I have a tiny little sliver. Let me not be absolutely thrilled and kind of almost like lose my mind with woohoo, partying when things are great. And when things are bad, let me remember that this is just a puzzle piece of a larger story. Let me have a certain degree of temperance, of moderation, of modulation when things are going well. Meaning, if things are going well financially, let me save money and be fiscally responsible. When things are going well with my children, let me be grateful and humble, recognizing how humble I need to be in appreciation that things are good. Let me not be arrogant. Oh, it's because I did this that it all worked out, or it's because I did this investment, or I did this that I have all this money. Let me not have an elusive sense of arrogance or a false sense of arrogance or pride when things are going well. And when things are going bad, let me remember that this too is going to pass, that this is part of a larger story. Let me have this quality of temperance, of sort of modulation, like of humility and gratitude when it's going well. And when it's not going well, of a sense of, I don't have the whole picture. I recognize that only you, God, have the whole picture. And even though my heart is broken, I don't have the whole picture. This is I call it the lost character trait, because we don't talk about temperance. It's sort of like an old Christian word, but it's a Jewish value. Let me not be too giddy or arrogant, and let me not be too despairing, because ultimately everything, what feels good and what feels bad, is ultimately from you. And that's really, and so I think that's really the end of the Mishnah, which is don't despair from what you see, whether it's for the good, and let yourself not be giddy and arrogant and think that it's because of you that you have this. And when things are bad, let you remember that it's part of a larger picture that you don't possess, but you're in the hands of a loving Father. And that's really what we say when in so many areas in Judaism, when we acknowledge, there's that sort of the temporal nature of life, that our days are like a passing shadow, meaning if we think the good is permanent, we could lose it. If we think the bad is permanent, something could shift. We really, I think COVID's teaching us, you make a plan and it flies away. Our wisdom really lies in understanding that we don't have the whole picture. So, you know, these parshas are so, these week's parshas are so powerful. But there's, I think last week's parsha, so powerful when the brothers finally confront Yosef and they freak out because they did such bad stuff to Yosef. And Yosef now is the viceroy to Pharaoh himself. He's the second in command to Pharaoh himself. And they're scared. What's he going to do to us? They're shamed. What did we do to him? And ultimately, I think it's last week's parsha where Yosef says, he says, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. And at that moment, when he reveals himself to his brothers, everybody understood all the events that looked so terrible, that felt so wrong, that felt so fractured, that made no sense, that all led up to Yosef being there as a protectorate for his brothers as the famine came into the land to maintain what was going to be the Jewish people, and who would ultimately be freed from Egypt and receive the Torah and be the holy nation of the Jewish people. But at that moment when he said, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph, it all came into clarity. Oh, this is why this had to happen. And because of this had to happen. It was like this moment in this world where they had the whole picture. And the Chafetz Chaim says that will be the Messianic era. But instead of Ani Yosef, it will be Ani Hashem. God will say, I am God. This is why this happened. And this is why this had to happen. And for this had to happen. And we will say, now I have the whole picture. And that's what we mean when we say, whenever somebody dies, we say, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. We say, Baruch, blessed, Dayan, judge, Ha'emet, the truthful. Blessed is the truthful judge. So if somebody dies, the first thing you're supposed to say, and you don't say it in a humble way. Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. Blessed is the true judge. This looks terrible to me, but Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. God is a just judge. I don't have the full picture, but one day I will. And just like when Joseph said to his brothers, I'm Joseph, and at that moment they all understood why this whole cycle of events had to happen, so too God will say that at the end of days. And that is the basic Jewish understanding, that just straight out in Talmud Brachot, a person who's facing suffering, it doesn't mean, or Baba Basra in the Talmud, it says a person should complain and cry and kick and scream to God when they're suffering. It shows them that they know that God is there. Kick and scream when God is suffering, but don't despair. Don't despair, because we don't have the whole picture. And that's, Talmud Bracha says, that's the true definition of simcha, of joy. Joy doesn't mean happy, and it can mean tremendous suffering. But while suffering, it means the faith and trust that there is a divine judgment and that there is a bigger picture. So when it says, so just to sum up real quick, and then we're going to stop. So we have this is the pair, the Zugot, Yehoshua ben Prachia and Nita Arabelli. Yehoshua ben Prachia says, you're totally biased, and you are a judger by definition, by essence. So get yourself objective people in your life and strive to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Nitaya Arabelli says, true and yet, don't be naive. Distance yourself from bad. Even if you have association, al titaber, ititchaber, don't, just like a motor is independent from the pieces, but the pieces are dependent on the motor, retain a certain independence from those influences, and do not despair, because even though we don't have temperance, When things are going well, have humility and gratitude. When things are going badly, understand that you don't have the whole picture and there's a true judge. Don't despair. There is a whole picture. So that's sort of, those two Mishnahs are put together. So that's really it. And we're going to open it up to anybody who, you know, wants to share, but those are the two Mishnahs that really go together. Okay. So anybody who wants to unmute. What? I just want to be, okay. Oh, we have 5 minutes. Okay. I want to honor everybody's time. Does anybody have anything to say about either part of this joint Mishnah? Anyone at all?
Well, you know, we always say that, you know, when we're talking about giving somebody the benefit of the doubt, you know, I always remember you teaching us, or somebody teaching us, we come in on page, you know, 300 and we don't know what happened the previous pages. So you can't be judgeful of somebody that you don't know the whole picture of.
And yet, you're right, 100%. But at the moment of judgment, anyway. We do it anyway.
Yeah.
So that's why we have to pray. Because you really can't give, I mean, intellectually, when you're separate from it, you can do it. But at the moment of desire, you really lose that ability. And that's why I love this prayer so much. It's a humility of recognizing that, okay, Sue, when you're sitting in your nice living room and you're thinking about it intellectually, great. But at the moment, it's like, I wonder, like, oh my gosh, did the 12 steps, did they understand that? It's such a powerful idea. And yet you have to pray at the moment because you don't really have the strength at that moment.
You know what else, Sally? You know,
yeah,
thinking about all this, you know, COVID has made everyone so judgmental.
Yeah.
And it goes on and on and on. Who got the booster? Who wasn't vaccinated? I mean, especially living in Florida and Looney Land here, you know, the land that, you know, there was never any COVID. And you have to like forget about it. I don't want to know who's vaccinated. I don't want to know who's not vaccinated, you know, because people.
Hey, Robin, you're half behind a door. Will you move to the left?
Oh, you know what? Sorry, I'm doing a painting.
Yeah.
It's my
it looks like you're okay, that's better. Go on.
Sorry. But you know, everyone finds reason to be judgmental. I mean, it's terrible. And you know, I've been working a lot with human traffickers. So I don't know if some of you have seen the movie The Maid. I work with a lot of abused women, and it's just like that. And I had a friend in town, and he's an attorney, and he took the side of the prosecutor. And I have some women who are going before their traffickers. And it's like, are you kidding me? You're putting judgment on, like, women are asking for this. You know, it's like, you know, the girl, that college student in Italy, it's awful, you know, and in those countries, you are guilty before you're presumed innocent. And the judgmental, just, it has to stop. I mean, I work with these people. I have no judgment. I don't know what it's like. I never want to know what it's like. I just want to be there for them. You know, they're human beings. We're all human beings. Who are we to judge someone else? It's like, it's awful. It's so disturbing on so many levels that I think we really need to take a step back, especially now with COVID. It's very troublesome.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, I highly recommend what Robin brought up. It's not a movie, Robin. It's a one season show
with Annie McDowell and her daughter.
It's very, very powerful. I watched the whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say before Robin made that poignant point.
Sorry, Stephen.
That just before this lesson, I had a call with a client, And he asked me a question that I had a very difficult time answering. And that question was, how do you know when you can trust somebody?
Wow.
Silence.
How did you answer that?
How did I answer that? Well, I said, I guess you have to talk to them. You have to check your references and referrals and trust your gut. Go with your gut. I didn't really have an answer.
Susie, you want to comment on this? Well, you're still muted. Susie, you're muted.
You did it in a business relationship, so that's different than what I was thinking. But how do you trust?
I made the point that we're not on when trust is not limited to business relationship, is it?
No, but what I was going to say in terms of an interpersonal relationship, I don't think you can develop. It's not something that happens quickly. I think trust is something that develops over time, and in each individual's own way. Through the relationship, they test the person, not necessarily intentionally, but through whether they follow through on things, whether their judgment is good in certain situations that it may be problematic. I mean, over time, as the relationship develops, I think trust comes along with that. But I don't think it's something that you could discern readily or quickly for me.
Well, I guess in the context of a personal relationship, you certainly have more time than you do in a business relationship.
Exactly. That's why that's so difficult to determine.
You have to make a rather quick determination.
Mm-hmm.
There's been so many thoughts, Allie, during this hour, so thank you. But, interesting what Robin said just before. Just recently, I started playing tennis indoors as it got colder here in Washington. And in this little bubble of a tennis place, one of the girls in my little group, I'm told, was not vaccinated. And, there was supposed to be a rule that you can't go indoors, at least here I'm in Maryland, without wearing a mask. And if you're not vaccinated. And one of these girlfriends in my tennis group, we all know she was not vaccinated. And all of a sudden, she showed up to play tennis a couple weeks ago. And I am vaccinated, I'm boosted, and I don't have to wear a mask indoors. And I was having like anxiety just thinking about this one girl in the group who came not vaccinated and was not wearing a mask indoors. And we were all petrified to say something to her because it didn't feel right to butt into her business. And again, we were all judging, right, in our own ways. And I forced myself, in order to get over my own personal anxiety, I had to change the focus. And I forced myself to just start saying, Stacy, forget her. You just, you stay in your lane, focus on yourself. You'll walk out of here, you'll go wash your hands, you'll take your clothes off, go shower. Stop worrying about her. And it was interesting how I felt this weight lifted off of me when I could change my thinking. So anyways, this was one of the thoughts I had, Allie, while you were teaching today. And the other thought I had was back in the day, I was thinking of the phrase guilt by association. Mm-hmm. I think there's so much truth to that. And I remember many, many years ago, my husband would play golf on the weekend at a country club. And he would come home and talk about how the guys were smoking pot, you know, in between holes or on the golf course. And I remember we were all sort of freaking out. And eventually my husband decided he did not want to be associated with this group of men. Again, guilt by association. If everybody starts talking about the guys who were smoking pot on the golf course, my husband didn't want his name associated with that, and he removed himself from this, you know, nice group of guys, but he removed himself from that group. So again, I don't know, just thoughts going through my mind while you were teaching today, Allie.
So Stacy, the first thing is the first story you told. Are you saying that the relief, you felt lighter when you took the focus of blame, like the sort of blaming the other person, all the anxiety that came with the blame of the other person, and you kind of used your power of choice to say, focus on what you can control and how you're going to handle the situation. And you almost like trained your brain to not fixate on what you couldn't control, which was this other person. Is that basically what you were saying?
Yes. I started reminding myself that perhaps she has a medical condition. Perhaps
right.
this, perhaps that, you know, and that started making me feel better. And yes, so yes, Allie.
Right. That, what you did, I mean, now we're talking about the vaccination, whatever, it's so political, but, or whatever it is, but what you did, those sort of mental gymnastics, like maybe she has a medical condition, that's actually what we're supposed to do. Maybe they were this, or maybe they were that. You know, even a far-fetched like possibility, because it's so true that you don't have the whole picture.
And I
so you're actually supposed to do that.
Yeah, and what's funny is we were all whispering, you know, God, I wish you would have told us, or, you know, why she's not wearing a mask, or, you know, but then I thought, I mean, does she owe it to, it was really an interesting few moments, or an interesting hour and a half as we were all whispering, you know, behind her back. But did she owe it to us to tell all of us why she's not wearing a mask? You know, we all probably would have felt better had she had a very justified answer for why she came without a mask, rather than all the ideas that were going through everyone's minds. But again, I just had you can see I'm like already having a hard time breathing, reliving that few hour and a half. I had to just like put it aside. You know what, Stacy? Forget it. Just focus on yourself, and you'll be okay. And just walk out, wash your hands, and but it was mental gymnastics. I think that's a very mental gymnastics of putting things.
Right. Yeah, Adrian.
I'm a little conflicted listening to this story, because I think you have two things going on. One, judgment about why she was or was not vaccinated, which definitely is part of our lesson about being judgmental. But her not wearing a mask, I think, is something else. And that's putting everybody else's health maybe at risk. And I don't know that we are in a position to make medical judgments like that. And I'm not so happy with leaving that behind. I think she could have been called out for that, because that was a rule. And, you know, if you should be wearing a mask. If you're not vaccinated, you're not saying, I don't agree with the reason that you're vaccinated or not vaccinated, but the consequences, there could be consequences. So I'm struggling with this.
You're making a delineation between a human being's individual decision whether or not to vaccinate, which belongs to them, and a public social decision to not follow the rules and wear a mask where other people are affected by that decision. And you feel that judgment is sort of allowed in the second area where we really need to do those mental gymnastics to avoid judgment in the first. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I am.
I think she's saying even more than that. It's not just a question of the right to judge. I think she's saying that they had a right to step up and call her out on it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I agree.
Because if
how do you call it out? How, Adrian, how does, let's say Stacy decided she would take action in the second area, not the first, but the second. How does one call another out in an area that they feel they're socially impacting other people?
I'm very concerned that someone here might be compromised in some way and you were putting them at risk. Would you mind putting your mask on?
I thought about doing that, Adrian. And I'm not shy. Allie knows I'm really not shy. I don't know why I felt uncomfortable saying something. I was afraid it was going to turn into like the entire group. In fact, they all know I'm not shy and they all kept saying, Stacey, say something for all of us. But yet it didn't feel right for whatever reason. And certainly at that moment, I don't know, it didn't feel right to confront her, even if it could have been in a nicer way. It just,
the fact she was doing behavior that was causing people to talk behind her back, that's not right either, because everybody was being judgmental, and that you could have kind of put a stop to some of that, I think, by being straightforward about your anxiety about wearing the mask.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I needed you by my side, Adrian.
Wait, hold on, Adrian, I think you're bringing up a really, really important point. Anyone who struggles with people pleasing, which is a lot of people, you know, Stacey, you probably have a little people pleaser in you, right? Which is like, if you were to courageously communicate, to do what Adrian, you know, how Adrian presented that, it could potentially have cut down a tremendous amount of the judgment. I mean, you're not responsible for other people's judgment, but I do think that when we courageously communicate, when we actually say without hurting other people, without trying to hurt them, without doing damage, but we're honest with what we think, which takes a lot of courage. I mean, even in the most intimate of relationships, how important it is to be able to speak honestly without hurt. I mean, Adrian, that's how I'm sort of reading your point, which is I'm not out to hurt you. What?
I think it's kind of an obligation. I mean, you know, we're surrounded by this stuff all the time. And you know, I feel obliged. There are ways, I mean, we've had past lessons. There are ways that you can communicate. But when you see something that you think is wrong, I think we're kind of obligated to say something. Mm-hmm. Otherwise,
hi, Donna.
Hi, Ellie. Hi, everybody. I missed part of the class. I'm sorry. But I just wanted to add, I think, again, it's how you say things, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be in a judgmental way. It could be, hey, you know, somebody was telling me that not everybody here is vaccinated. Are we all vaccinated before we play? I mean, I play tennis too. I don't choose to play inside right now. And, you know, I'm outside Chicago. But it's just how you say things. And I think also standing up, like you said, this is you know, we're in a pandemic. This is not, you know, about insulting anybody or being, I know I tend to lean towards some judgmental when it comes to medical issues. However, we're talking about well-being, like Adrian said, about other people who may be compromised and looking out for each other. This is a pandemic where we have to look out for each other as well, put ourselves maybe first in health and what our considerations are. And yet look to that, you know, be part of a team here, you know, be part of a community that says, you know, I'm not comfortable with this. Or maybe, you know, I'll just share a quick story. I was, for the first time, ventured out to the theater, and they have policies now. Broadway tour is all, you know, you proof of vax and all that. Well, we sat down and 3 people over, they weren't wearing their masks. The masks were mandated inside. So I was really upset. And I'm a pediatric nurse, and there's a little child on the other side who's bald with a mask. I mean, I was getting livid that people are so inconsiderate and think they're just above the rules, you know, and it was a mix of a lot of things. Partially, yes, very judgmental, but I feel like my intention was to keep me safe, my daughter safe, who's pregnant, who, you know, and everybody safe. And so I wanted to jump in and say something. And they're like, whoa, mom, don't say it. Go to the usher, you know? So there was a different way for me to handle it, instead of looking down the aisle and saying, are you freaking kidding? Like motioning, like put your mat, like getting in the middle of what could be an escalating situation, or maybe she has a knife in her pocket. Like, I mean, the world is crazy right now. So you do have to protect yourself. However, I felt like that was a helpful way. And then of course, the next day I called the subscription office, because I've had season tickets now downtown for minus the past year and a half, 2 years, you know, for 25 years. So I put a call in, I sent an email to the manager. I mean, there are ways to be part of the community in a helpful, I think, beneficial way, and informing people, because the men in the subscriber office who were talking, oh yeah, we have this in place and we have this in place, and the usher, that's not what really, you know, what the goal was, and we saw on the ground, so to speak, was not the same. So they needed to just be aware. I mean, there's just ways, I think, to learn to navigate, because this is the new normal. This is not going away. And yes, we are vaccinated, boosted. We're the ones who are protected, thank God. I believe in science, so I'm on that train. And I have a lot of underlying conditions, so I'm very extra careful. But it's, again, how you say it. Maybe there was somebody at the tennis club that, you know, or maybe start from the small group. You know, I heard somebody may not be, are we all vaccinated? We're playing together, you know, like real light and easy, but to the point. And I wish you well. And I trust your judgment. And if it didn't feel right, I believe that we are learning through it, you know, to listen to ourselves and our insides, our guts, and our prayer. I feel like there may be more next time you might consider doing to protect yourself. I mean, things happen, God forbid.
Right. And Donna, I think the two missions next to each other, like to Donna's point, to Adrian's point, to Stacey's point, the two missions together are meant to show us how far we have to go to give people the benefit of the doubt, and yet at the same time, how discerning and honest and proactive we need to be to do the right thing. So, I mean, if you read the two missions together, you're really seeing that in Stacey's case on the court, in Donna's case in the theater, you actually do have to go out of your way to not demonize the other person. They have a different perspective. You are obligated to not objectify them, vilify them, satirize them, come down on them. They have a perspective, but neither are you exempt from taking respectable action. So I think what you guys are illustrating is exactly, I think there's a lot of like, it's sort of like the middle ground of these two missions together. It's also, I think what's coming up is also that it's not vilifying the person. I think, Stacey, maybe your discomfort was that the girls were congregating again. It was like the classic, you know, triangulation. I feel closer to you by like freaking out about her. You know, that's like the classic triangle of human relationships. Women are really good at this. I get closer to you by like vilifying or like dealing with her. You know, what are we going to do about her? So that's what you want to avoid. You want to avoid the vilification, the satirization, the mocking, the simplification of another person, thinking you know them when you don't understand them. At the same time, you're not meant to be, if you're in a theater and you're not comfortable, if you're on a court and you're not comfortable, you're not required to give the benefit of the doubt to the point that you don't protect and you don't act in yours or your family's or your community's best interest. But what you do want to be careful about, I think, you know, the court and the theater are two good examples, is the vilification of the person. And that, I mean, that are you know, the media on both sides just satirizes, makes fun of, vilifies the other side, like really like they're absolutely buffoons or evil, when in fact they're all people and they see things differently. So you do what you need to do to stay safe or be responsible, but not by vilifying another person. Because when you vilify, you subjectify, you objectify. When you objectify, you think you know where they're coming from. You're objectifying them, but they are a whole person, and you don't know their story. So they're just two good stories that show you what you need to avoid and where you need to take action. So, I mean, just think about that. Think about, you know, what can, like Donna was saying, or Adrian's point, like, what can I do or say that that does something proactive in this situation without satirizing or thinking that I know the motives, thinking that I know I can trust my assessment of this person, that they're just an idiot or bad, or they don't care about others, or they're this, that, or the other thing. That I need to avoid. I'm actually obligated not to do that, but I'm also obligated to do what I need to do to remain healthy, safe, whatever it is. So that, I mean, the two stories are really illustrative.
Right. Donna's was a little easier because you could have just gone to the usher, you know, and the usher wouldn't have known.
Well, Stacy could have taken a ball and just hit her over the head. So.
Well, there you go.
Hey, boom, boom. All right, guys, I have to go. But sending love to everybody. And may just in the merit of this class, may we all seek to